The Association of the U.S. Army is pleased to welcome you to AUSA's Thought Leaders webinar series, a new webinar series featuring military leaders and contemporary military authors. Kicking off today's webinar is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Association of the U.S. Army, General Carter Ham.
Let me start, General Nakasone, just with some general questions. And if we could maybe start off by talking about the threats that we face. We hear a lot in the public media about disruption, about cyber crime, about terrorist organization, about trolling and other methods of influence. Okay. What concerns you in all of those threats that we face?
So first of all, General Ham, thank you so much for hosting this today. It's great to be back at AUSA. I think that today's conversation is particularly important given the times in which we live. Before we talk a little about cyber threats, let's take a step back and just talk about cyber within the context of our national defense strategy. Perhaps the most important document over the 3 decades that I've served in, as we take a look at great power competition. And I think the National Defense Strategy really characterizes it well. We are in a period of great power competition. We see that every single day in cyberspace. Our adversaries are able to do a number of different things, and they are not just episodically involved, they're involved every single day. What have we seen over the past 10 years? A movement from exploiting our classified systems, to disrupting our communications, to destructive attacks, and now even influence operations that our adversaries have conducted in, the 2016 elections. It's interesting as we look at that really is competition. And that's why I think the National Defense Strategy is so important. So I take a look at all of those threats, everything from, competition and where we need to be, but also the capabilities of our adversaries to be able to conduct destructive elements. And this is where we spend a significant part of our time, both at U.S. Cyber Command and at the National Security Agency.
The threats obviously are numerous and continuing, and we recognize that certainly some of them, a lot of your work occurs in classified space that we're not able to talk about it in this environment. But a topic that has been talked a lot about publicly over the past couple of years has been the influence, particularly in the 2018 midterm elections. And I think, in fact, the president has commented on those efforts. Could you tell us what you've learned at Cyber Command about the 2018 effort, and how does that inform actions that you and the command may need to take in preparation for the upcoming 2020 elections?
2018 was a really remarkable year, because at that point we had well-trained and well-led forces in U.S. Cyber Command and NSA come together with the right authorities and policies, and also matched with this idea of having an organizational construct. Many of you know I set up the Russia Small Group shortly after taking over at NSA and Cyber Command to bring together the best elements of both Cyber Command and NSA to make sure that 2018 was a much different election. And it was. And so what do we learn from 2018? That agility, speed, and unity effort matter. The fact that you have to be able to work with your partners. Our partners were a whole of government effort. It wasn't just Cybercom and NSA, it was FBI and the Foreign Intelligence Task Force, or DHS and the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency. Bringing those elements together, critical for what we could do. And then the last part, it was about outcomes. It was about outcomes over a period of time. And so how does that inform me for 2020? Our number one goal, our number one objective at the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command, a safe, secure, and legitimate 2020 elections. How are we going to do that? First of all, we're going to generate insights about our adversaries. Much like 2018, we're going to know our adversaries better than they know themselves. Second piece, we're going to broaden that partnership. We're going to make partnership not only within our interagency, but also how do we expand it with partners that are doing things that are incredibly important to us. Many of you know that in academia, we have a number of great institutions that are doing work to take a look at the role of social media and influence operations. Whether or not you go to Clemson University or Stanford University or other universities, they have tremendous work ongoing. We want to make sure that we partner with them. Last thing that we're going to do, we're going to act. We're going to act when we see adversaries attempting to interfere in our elections.
That's a pretty clear statement, and I think it's a heavy burden that you and the command and the agency carry. But we have, all of us that know a bit about what you do, have great confidence in you and the team's ability. That team, like all the rest of us, has been affected over the past several months by the COVID-19 coronavirus. How has that affected you and your ability to accomplish your many varied missions?
I don't think I need to tell anyone that COVID-19 has affected all of us. For myself, as both the commander and director, my number one priority is the safety of our workforce. At the same time, it's the ability to make sure that we continue to do our no-fail missions. I cannot imagine a day that U.S. Cyber Command or the National Security Agency isn't part of our nation's defense. But it's really been ingenious in terms of some of the things that not only DoD has done, but the Army has done to be agile in the face of a pandemic. Take a look at the commercial virtual remote enterprise, CVR we call it. What is it? It's the ability to bring voice, video, chat, file transfer to a number of different users. This is the underpinning of telework. So let me give you an example. In March, we had 0 users with CVR. 15 April, 450,000 users. By 15 July, 1.2 million users. The Sergeant Major of the Army, Grinston, has taken CVR and conducted training and standards discussions over a 3-day period with 180 different senior NCOs throughout our Army. This is what agility looks like in the face of a pandemic. Very, very proud in terms of what we've been able to do at Cyber Command and NSA, or broadly across the DoD, to think about, okay, there's a change in the environment. Much in this way we see a change in any environment, the DoD and our Army are going to act.
Is this perhaps the leading edge of a new normal, to use that overused phrase, as much as we cherish and value in-person events, and there certainly are some things that are best affected in person, but this expansion of virtual space, and just as you mentioned with Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston, are we on a leading edge of a substantive change in how we do business?
I think we are. I mean, think about just the simple thing of video teleconferences. Normally that was reserved for general and flag officers and senior DoD officials. The fact that now we have 180 senior enlisted leaders coming up and being able to share information with our Sergeant Major of the Army, that's powerful. But also think of the platform that it provides you. And this is not to minimize the context of personal interaction. We always have to have personal interaction. That's how commanders are able to influence what's going on. But we also have to realize that we are working in the midst of a pandemic. We're working with a population that is very, very comfortable and operating in this type of space. The fact that every single day I can touch any part of a worldwide global enterprise and be able to do it virtually, tremendously powerful.
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting time for all of us, and as we explore new platforms, and it's obviously not flawless as we have seen this morning, but I think there are many opportunities yet to be exploited.
You know, General Ham, I've learned a few things on this. I mean, I just would tell you that it always works much better when the mute button is, off, and then obviously when you're not talking when the mute button is on. So I mean, just a little bit of that. I think all of our senior officers have kind of discovered that that trait is important for us. Yeah,
and always assume the mute button is not working. That's right. That's to be careful. If I could bring you back inside to the NSA, you created a cyber security directorate. What is that, and what caused you to stand up that organization?
A former deputy director of the National Security Agency, Chris Inglis, probably put it best. He said, "Hey, what is it about the internet? Well, it's the place that we store our wealth and treasure. Think about the internet, how important it is to our nation, our economy, our military capabilities, our ability to socially communicate. Foundational what we do. At NSA, there are two missions that we have. We have a foreign intelligence mission we pursue through signals intelligence. The second piece is cybersecurity. My concern as I took over as the director of NSA is we had lost a part of that second element of cybersecurity. And so standing up this directorate was really the idea to be able to ensure that we were able to get at this critical mission set. What differentiates NSA within this space? Because there are a number of different players that operate within our government, and they do it very, very well, whether or not it's cybersecurity infrastructure security agency that is the front door to our government and to the public sector, whether or not it's the FBI that is so critical in being able to do cyber crime, or Cyber Command that has both the responsibility for securing our DoD information network and bringing offensive capabilities. What distinguishes NSA is two things. First of all, technical expertise. There's no one better with regards to the technical expertise to operate within this domain than those at the National Security Agency. Second is the rich, robust, and penetrating intelligence that we get that tells us what our adversaries are doing. So bringing that all together, working within partnership within our government, I saw standing up this directorate as one of the critical things that I needed to do early on in my tenure.
Of course, none of that is possible without the right people, extraordinarily talented, gifted, dedicated people in a very competitive workspace where the private sector, the business market for cyber skills is in very high demand. So how do you balance that? How do you recruit and retain the quality workforce that you require at your command and at your agency? How do you do that? And do you need any new authorities to help you recruit and retain those quality people?
It's really a spectrum of capabilities, General Ham, that we take a look at, and that's everything from assess, recruit, train, and then retain. I would tell you that as we take a look at the military side of this, the services do this exceptionally well. I look at our Army, and I've been involved in Army cyber since its stand-up 10 years ago. We have an incredible capability to be able to recruit talent to man our forces. The challenge is not training those individuals. The real opportunity is being able to retain them. This is being able to retain our best, not everyone, but our best. And how do we do that? We do that through a number of different initiatives. First of all, it begins with the mission. If you like to work hard problems, if you like to be in the middle of ensuring the defense of our nation, if you like to work with incredible people and superb technology, being at a place like Cyber Command or NSA is critical. But we've also been the beneficiaries of a number of different initiatives, both by Congress and by our services, to make sure that we have a significant amount of numeration for those forces. On the civilian side, we're in the midst of a hiring boom. In fact, last year we hired over 2,000 people at the National Security Agency. What was interesting, there were a number of different programs upon which we were able to balance that. Whether or not it was developmental programs, whether or not it was outreach to colleges, we're able to fill all of those 2,000 spaces. Critically important.
You talked about a whole of government approach to this, mentioned some of the other government agencies, some of the private institutions that you're partnered with moving forward. But a question about persistent engagement with allies and partners, both traditional and non-traditional, and engagement with multinational organizations such as the European Union and others as we move forward. Could you talk a bit about how the command moves forward in that alignment and that partnership with other nations?
If I might take a step backward, let's talk a little bit about persistent engagement. Persistent engagement really is two factors. One, how do you enable partners, whether or not it's the sharing of information, sharing of intelligence, working closely with government or private sector? And the second part is acting. How do you act in a way that's able to impose cost on your adversary? whether or not that's through hunt forward teams, whether or not it's through a number of different operations. The whole idea is a fairly simple concept, but it gets at this idea that cyber is competition, much in the same way I talked at the beginning. Our adversaries every day are not waiting to steal our intellectual property, steal our personal information, or try to interfere in our democratic processes. That's what our adversaries are doing. My belief is we have to have a persistent engagement approach, the ability to both enable and to act. And so this is what we showed in 2018. This is what we're doing today. This is what we work very, very closely throughout the department. Because at the end of the day, this is in support of the National Defense Strategy and support of our DoD cybersecurity strategy, this idea of being able to defend forward.
Let me go back to the issue of threats, and you outlined some of those in your discussion about the National Defense Strategy. But could you go a little bit more in detail about the threats that you see? You talked a bit about Russia, but if you could talk a bit about North Korea and China, what do you see as in terms of cyber threats from those two nations?
So I would say for all of our adversaries in the 2+3, whether or not it's Russia or China or North Korea or Iran, what we're seeing are really a couple things that are foundational to the development over the past couple years. First of all, a rise in capacity. Our adversaries know that this is a means upon which that they can attempt to have an impact on us. And so we've seen the growth in terms of programs across all of those major adversaries. But secondly, we've also seen a rise in capability. And so much in the same way we become a much more capable force, so are our adversaries. And so I would tell you, whether or not it's China or it's Iran or it's North Korea, this is why it's so important that we are in a daily competition with what we need to do. And I would say that the advantages that we have are often not talked about. But think of the advantages. First of all, a series of partnerships with a number of different allies that our adversaries can never match. Secondly, we have a force within the Department of Defense for over 2 decades is really battle tested. And that leadership aspect has been very, very influential in being able for us to build a very, very capable cyber force. And the third piece really comes back down to our people. We have world-class people. There is no nation on earth that has the universities, that has the innovational spirit, that has the capability to develop the talent that we have today.
Yeah, thanks for that. The threats certainly are diverse and challenging. We have a number of questions from a number of different people in the audience about how cyber operations fit in cross-domain, multi-domain, all-domain operations. As that operating concept continues to evolve in the Department of Defense, cyber operations, of course, don't occur in isolation. But how does cyber operations fit in that all-domain operations concept?
Really, General, when we take a look at how cyber fits in, there are 3 different missions within Cyber Command. 1 is to defend the nation in cyberspace. 2 is to defend our networks, our systems, and our data within DoD. And thirdly is to work with Joint Force Commanders. And this third part is really, I think, what you're getting at. So we have worked very, very hard with all of the combatant commands, particularly the geographic combatant commands, to look and say, so how does this non-kinetic capability fit within your war plans for the future? How do we set the theater? How do we ensure that we're providing support to our combatant commanders deployed around the world? How do we ensure that the services can rely on their trusted weapons and platforms? Those are all pieces of what Cyber Command, and to a large degree the National Security Agency, is going to be able to provide. So this mix of being able to bring both non-kinetic and kinetic abilities really has defined us over the past couple of years. And I think it's really our contribution as we go forward, working with the combatant commands as they look at all of their war plans.
To build a bit on that warfighting idea, General Milley, when he was Chief of Staff of the Army and now as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has spoken frequently about the changing character of war. And part of that is the increasing presence, reliance perhaps on artificial intelligence, robotics, manned-unmanned teaming, unmanned-unmanned teaming. From your perspective, what are some of the challenges in that evolution, and what are some of the vulnerabilities that the force must be conscious of?
Well, I think General Milley has it exactly correct here. I mean, if you take a look at whether or not it's machine learning or artificial intelligence, I think the first piece that we all have to understand is it's not the fact that we just say, hey, we're going to do AI or ML. There are a series of different conditions that we have to set to make sure that our Army, our DoD, our joint force is going to be successful in being able to leverage both artificial intelligence and machine learning. It begins with, do we have the infrastructure that's in place? Do we have the capabilities upon which we can rely on to get the data when necessary? Secondly is this idea of culture change. You know, being able to rely on data, whether or not it's for logistics predictions, or whether or not it's for intelligence, or whether or not it's for mission command. There is a certain amount of culture change that is ongoing right now that we have to continue to be able to leverage and encourage going forward. And then finally, it comes down to a supply of people, the right people, data scientists, mathematicians, people that can think about policy, people that think about the legal aspects of what's going on here. This is not a very large pool right now, and it's a pool, as you had indicated, is in great competition by both the public and the private sector. But these three elements, infrastructure, culture, and supply, are the opportunities that we have to build on in the future.
So much as the character of war is changing, the character of business is changing in many of those same ways, with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics and the rest. That's a real challenge for our nation. In the Department of Defense, essentially a hierarchical organization, essentially a closed community, but business is worldwide, it's global, it's extensive, it's vast. How do you and the command and the agency assist businesses, particularly businesses that provide essential services and goods? How do you help them ensure that their networks are also secure?
Well, let me talk a little bit about an initiative that we've had at U.S. Cyber Command that I think it's important and also exemplar of how we need to act. It's a facility called Dreamport that's just outside our headquarters, just down the road, about 10 minutes. That is a completely unclassified facility that allows us to attract private sector, allows us to post a number of different challenges we want the private sector to work on. It's a meeting place upon which we can bring together a number of different experts to talk about hard challenges. That's not something we perhaps would have done several years ago. But for a very, very small infusion of money, we've created a center that really is an opportunity for us to get ahead of really difficult challenges. But it also brings in the private sector to see what they're doing and have our folks be able to engage with them. This is part of really this idea of a very flat structure. I think that this is, whether or not we're talking about our ability to conduct information dispersal with CVR to a number of different leaders or individuals, or whether or not to have facilities like this where our experts can come together, this isn't hierarchical. This is the idea of being able to get at hard problems with some very, very ingenious solutions.
We have a number of questions about the protection of intellectual property, probably applicable both inside the government and in the private sector as well. How do you address that? And it gets to I think another question of this balancing that you have to wrestle with of both offensive and defensive capabilities that the nation expects of you. I suspect there's probably not a lot you want to say publicly about offensive capabilities, but how do we ensure that the intellectual property of the United States and United States businesses are not threatened by our adversaries?
Well, I think General Ham, and this is interesting in the sense that the DoD is the sector-specific agent for the defense industrial base. We have tremendous concerns with regards to our adversaries stealing our intellectual property. That's our seed corn, not only for our economy, but for our national security. So this has been a process over the past couple of years that's been led by the Secretary to get after this. How do we work to ensure that businesses understand and the private sector understands the threats that they face? How do we work on a macro sense in look at simple solutions, whether or not it's secure DNS or secure email or other ways upon which we can further instantiate the ability of our defense industrial base to adequately protect themselves. But it's also the construct of defense industrial base understands that it's not only the primaries, but also the subs that they must have responsibility to ensure their cybersecurity. And then finally, it gets back to this idea of persistent engagement. Our adversaries, as they attempt to steal our intellectual property or steal our personal identifiable information or attempt to interfere in our democratic processes, we must enable and act those that work with us.
All of us who spend time either in front of a television screen or online have heard a lot lately about 5G. Lots of different providers of 5G, some of them not US. As you look at 5G from your perspective, what are advantages and what are concerns that we Americans ought to be concerned about, both inside government and in our daily lives?
5G, fifth generation. For a person that remembers first generation, I would tell you, as I was describing it to my parents one day, fifth generation is like moving from the radio to the television. It's going to have that big an impact upon what we're going to do in our economy, what we're going to be able to do within our military, what we're going to be able to do in our communications throughout the world. We as a nation have been leaders within 4G for many years. Now, I have a number of different concerns with regards to 5G, particularly being able to understand what our adversaries have the capability of doing. And so part of the 5G conversation has been, do nations want to entrust the security of what will likely be their most important platform for communications to a nation that doesn't share their values? That's something that I think we as a government have been rightfully pointing out is a tremendous risk, and one that we should be very, very careful of ever making.
Certainly a challenge, but I think if the advertisement are any indication, this is going to continue to be a challenge for us for many, many years. So related to that, I think is a concern that I think the average American citizen doesn't think much about cybersecurity. You obviously spend every waking moment and probably every sleeping moment thinking about cybersecurity, as does your command and the agency. But what can be done to educate the public, me, and other users about the very real concerns that are the threats that are present in cyber operations, and things that we ought to be doing to minimize or at least mitigate those risks to the extent that the average citizen can undertake?
I think the first thing I would say is that we have to raise the bar. Right now, our adversaries have far too much success being able to get in with the most simplest of activities, clicking on links that lead to malicious software, not patching our operating systems, not being wise to ensure that we've got proper passwords or two-factor authentication. Those three things in general would eliminate roughly 90% of the threats that we're seeing today. So what we've done is we've allowed our adversaries to literally use the most simple techniques to get into our networks, to challenge our data, or to create further havoc. We as citizens, whether or not you're going to take a look at what's been published by CISA of DHS in terms of what should be done, or you take a look at any of the advertisements or any of the information that has been proffered from a number of different antivirus companies, updating those type of things, whether or not it's patching your system, whether or not it's improving your passwords, whether or not it's avoid clicking on links. It's like the things that I always talk about to be able to raise the bar, and we need to raise that bar. We need to make sure our adversaries are having to use their most sophisticated techniques, because today they're not.
So we're nearing the end of our time. So two more questions, General Nakasone, and then I'll ask you for some closing comments. During your confirmation hearing, you told the Senate Armed Services Committee that you expected that the cyber mission force would grow and would necessarily grow given the range of threats that the nation faces. Are you seeing that growth? Are you starting to experience that? And what do you see in terms of the cyber mission force going forward?
We built the cyber mission force starting in late 2012. And if you take a look at 8 years ago, those 133 teams that were looked at as being the core of what we're going to do, we're facing a much different world in 2012, 2013. Think about what's come on to us since then. Whether or not it's the attack into Sony Pictures America, whether or not it's been the stealing of our personally identifiable information in the Office of Personnel Management, whether or not it's the 2016 elections. I am a believer that that force needs to grow, and that's one of the things that we're involved in right now is we take a look at the budget, and one of the things that I'll be advocating for with the Secretary. That's a work in progress. The good news here is that the Army has already grown the force within our Reserve and National Guard. 21 different cyber protection teams, 11 in the Guard, 10 in the Army Reserve. That is like incredible in terms of our ability to be able to leverage a strategic asset when necessary. So I'm very, very pleased in terms of where the Army has gone with it. But I would say as we look forward, I will certainly be an advocate for looking at broader growth, obviously within the context of what our nation and what our department can afford.
As you mentioned in some of your earlier comments, Cyber Command is now 10 years old. What would you mark as perhaps the most significant lessons learned during the command's first 10 years and its position within the Department of Defense and now with the combatant commands? Where do you see things going in the next 10 years? Some have proposed that the cyber force ought be like the Special Operations Force or now the Space Force and be its own service. Do you see anything like that in the offing?
So 10 years ago, we stood up U.S. Cyber Command. But I would also say, before I talk broadly about U.S. Cyber Command, let me come back to our Army and Army Cyber, because it's coming up on its 10-year anniversary as well. On Thursday, Lieutenant General Steve Fogarty is going to unfurl the colors of U.S. Army Cyber Command at Fort Gordon in a brand new facility, a $300 million facility built right next to NSA, Georgia. Incredible what our Army has done in terms of the investment and the importance that they place on cyber. Think about this. In 2013, General Odierno, then the Chief of Staff of the Army, decided that we needed a Cyber Center of Excellence, a school. 1 year later, he took the bold step of creating the Army's newest branch. And so for over 6 years, we as an Army have been able to develop that force, a school that trains our best, a branch upon which young people can come in and say, hey, one day I want to be a sergeant major within the cyber force of our Army, or one day I want to be the commander of U.S. Army Cyber Command. This is what we've been able to do as an Army. In terms of Cyber Command, much has changed since 10 years ago when we stood up the command. We went from a sub-unified to 2 years ago becoming a unified combatant command. With that, what have we learned? First of all, we've learned the idea that we can't be episodic in facing the adversaries of our nation. 2018 taught us this. We have to be persistently engaged with our adversaries. Secondly, we've learned that we don't operate alone. We operate with a series of partners, whether or not that's broader partners in the department as combatant commands, whether or not that's interagency partners like DHS and FBI, or whether or not that's international partners or academic partners. Partnership is alive and well in the cyber domain. It's something that we've captured. The final thing that we've learned, after everything and after every single tally has been made, the most important thing that we have is our people. It's our talent. It's what we have to do to be able to grow the next generation of leaders. We've been able to produce tremendous technology throughout our nation's history. But what really gives us the advantage is to be able to recruit, to be able to train, and as I mentioned, to be able to retain that group of leaders and that group of folks that manage our force. And that has been really what we've learned, General.
Well, thanks for that, General Nakasone, and thanks for this morning. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience this morning?
Well, two final thoughts I would offer. So the number one mission at U.S. Cyber Command, the National Security Agency, as I mentioned, a safe, secure, and legitimate 2020 presidential elections. How are we going to do that? We're going to understand our adversaries better than they understand themselves. Much in the same with 2018, we're going to work with a series of partners. And thirdly, when we see our adversaries attempting to interfere in our democratic processes, we will act. And I think most importantly, coming back to the final message I'd like to leave with folks, again, it's our people, it's our talent. That's what makes us different. If you're interested in solving hard problems, if you have an affinity for math or science or the legal aspects or policy or analysis, if you want to be part of a broader team, come join us. Military or civilian, cybercom or NSA, matters not. I cannot imagine a more exciting place to be in being able to defend our nation or secure the future.
Well, thank you, General Nakasone, for your candor, for your comments and your insights in a very fascinating conversation this morning. Before we close today, a couple of comments about some upcoming events. Our next AUSA Noon Report will feature Lieutenant General Charlie Flynn, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff, G357, Operations Plans Training. That will take place on Wednesday, the 22nd of July at noon, as the noon report might imply, Eastern Daylight Time. Our next Thought Leaders webinar will take place on this Friday, July 24th, and we'll hear from author Don Snedeker, who will discuss his new book about the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment entitled The Black Horse in Vietnam. And I know that Lieutenant General Guy Swan and all former Black Horse troopers will tune in for that event, an engaging discussion about a legendary unit in Vietnam. And lastly, on July 29th, also at AUSA's Noon Report, we will feature the Army Surgeon General, Lieutenant General Scott Dingle, to talk with us, and not just about the Army's response to COVID-19, but about how the Army medical community is restructuring itself for this changing character of war. To learn more or to register for these events, just visit our website at ausa.org. Finally, let me thank all of you who are AUSA members. Events like this simply are not possible without your membership. And if you happen to be listening today and you're not an AUSA member, we invite you to join us. Again, just go to ausa.org. It's a simple process, and it's a great way to support soldiers, our Army, and again, to allow us to put on events like this. Thank you all for attending us this morning. Have a great Army Day.